Hello, welcome. Dr. Sushma Singh this side. Today in Unit 21 Liberalization and Structural Adjustment Program, let us start our lecture with topic revenue issues. The government could, however, reduce its deficit by increasing revenues, by either increasing taxes or through high profits of the public sector enterprises. As part of the reform package, in order to reduce its liabilities, the government decided to sell its non-profit making enterprises. Expectedly, there were no takers because these were companies acquired by the government when the private sector was unable to run them. Since disinvestment was a stated policy of the government, it decided to sell the profit-making companies, thereby closing future sources of revenue. In 1999, the Department of Disinvestment was formed by the Indian government with a view to establishing a systematic policy approach to disinvestment and privatization and to give fresh impetus to the government's disinvestment program. Taxes form the major source of revenue for the government. In the initial phase of the structural adjustment program, a series of reforms measures were undertaken both on the direct and indirect tax front. The tax rates were reduced substantially with the hope that the reduced tax rates would result in greater tax compliance. Further, the attempts were made to increase the tax base by using non-income measures such as the possession of mobile phones, luxury car, etc. to determine tax liability because it is widely acknowledged that there is a gross underreporting of income. However, despite all these measures, there was a decline and stagnation of the tax revenue. The tax GDP ratio has not been able to climb back to the pre-reform period, which has severely affected the fiscal position of the government. A part of the decline can be attributed to the reduced customs collections since the process of liberalization entailed a reduction of import duties and taxes. There is, however, one thing to cheer about here. The share of direct taxes has gone up from a lowly 19% at the beginning of the reform period to a respectable 41% in 2003 to 2004. It is important that the bulk of the tax revenue be raised from direct taxes, otherwise the tax system will be considered regressive. Indirect taxes impose the same burden irrespective of the income earned by individuals, which is undesirable under the principles of ability to pay. According to this principle, the tax burden must increase with income. However, discussed the revenue options of the government to finance its expenditure, we now turn to the issue of borrowing, debts and its sustainability. Herein we will examine the debt liability status of the center, and this would link up with the discussion on rising revenue and fiscal deficit. When the tax and non-tax revenues are insufficient to meet the expenditure requirements of the government, the deficit can then either be financed by increasing the currency to circulation or by borrowing, increasing debts. The first option can be fraught with one kind of danger. It could lead to inflation in the economy. Since one of the targets of reform was to keep inflation under check, monetization of the deficit, at least not all of it, was not a valid option. The next option was to increase market borrowing. though there may not be a direct inflationary impact on this. The flip side is that there is an increase of debt liability, debt servicing obligations, and also fiscal vulnerability of the government. But Knight has, however, demonstrated that financing of deficit by directly selling in market as opposed in the process of borrowing from the central bank is not necessarily less inflationary when the credit market does not clear and there is an excess supply of credit that the banks are saddled with. In India, the debt to GDP ratio has risen over the reform period, but this has been mainly on the domestic front. The external debt has actually declined to 1.7% in 2003 to 4 and 5.5% in 1990 to 91. While increase in debt is not desirable, the fact that the most of it is domestic has one advantage. At least the debt servicing is in domestic currency. This means that foreign currency is not required for repayment of loans to the international lenders, and this reduces the external vulnerability of the Indian economy. However, a secular rise in the debt, even if domestic, is not desirable as it could leave the country vulnerable to the fiscal crisis. The other area of concern that has emerged during the crisis of 1991 to 91 was the management of the external account. The trade deficit, which had grown steadily over the 1980s and was financed by short-term borrowing in the international market, created a payment crisis at the time of the Kuwait-Iraq war, forcing India to seek an IMF loan. As part of the loan conditionalities, India was asked to liberalize its external sector, import and export, and make the current and capital account fully convertible. After the East Asian crisis, which many felt was exacerbated by not causing an open capital account, India slowed its move to a fully convertible capital account. Here we want to close this lecture. Thanks for listening.